We are joined with the man himself, Johnny Miller. Johnny Miller is a British journalist based in Moscow, spending much of his time covering the Ukraine war and reporting from Donbass. Johnny, I have to be honest with you. You will disagree with me on this, but I am somewhat jealous of your experiences, even though they're terrifying. Even though they're terrifying. I get the sense that when people, it's one thing for me to cover wars here, looking out at it from perched at the edge of the world and having a point of view. It's another thing to be there. It seems like your point of view will be more, I don't know, grounded, if that makes sense, just because you're there, like you see it. It's one thing for it to be conceptual and you're thinking about it. It's another thing for you to see it happen on a daily basis. Your emotions about it, how you feel about it are more visceral because you're engaged in it. I don't know. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing all right. Sorry, I was a little bit late. My alarm didn't go off. I don't know why. I set an alarm.
Well, you and Carl Jacques, neither one of your alarms went off.
Sometimes I just forget about appointments. So I set the alarm, just didn't go off. And suddenly I thought, I'm sure I'm doing an interview right now. So apologies for that.
No, but, it's perfectly okay. You came on and I appreciate you coming on.
The Moscow summer is, people think Russia's very cold, but the summer in Moscow is almost tropical. It's a very sticky heat, mosquitoes, tropical rainstorms. So Moscow summer is amazing. So I'm doing very well.
It's funny, that's the same thing has been taking place in the U.S., where it's been apparently brutally hot, and my mom has been coming, like she's like, "Oh my God, it's been so hot." Now keep in mind, in Malaysia, it's been like 98 degrees, 95 degrees every day, like just clockwork. Since you've been here, you wake up in the morning, it's like 85. So I do get it. I feel where you're coming from with it.
Yeah.
Hopefully at some point I'm going to get the opportunity to go to Moscow. I really want to visit. I really want to see the country itself. I want to, drink coffee in Red Square or vodka in Red Square or whatever. I want to talk about two things. One has to do with the protests that are taking place in Ukraine, and the other has to do with the results of the meeting between Russia and Ukraine that Zelensky was obviously forced to go to. He clearly didn't want to go. Were there any breakthroughs at all in the peace negotiations, quote unquote, that took place yesterday?
Well, it doesn't look like it. I think the Russian delegation says, one comment I saw, that he talked about China back in the civil war in China, saying Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong met about 5 times. All the time the West was giving one side weapons, but in the end, communist China won. And I think he was referencing that to say that these talks, we've had how many now? I mean, we had major talks in Istanbul 3 years ago. Yeah. And we had another one in Istanbul recently. This is the third. I think I'm probably missing 1 or 2 out. But there have been these meetings, various meetings, all the time, though. The West, if you like, just like in China, has been supplying weapons to the Ukrainian side. And what the Russian delegation is saying, that we can meet again and again and again. You can continue to give your weapons, but ultimately we will win. As communist China won, not quite so communist nowadays, Russia will win. And that's essentially what he's saying. So Russia's open to these peace talks, but I think very much they're going through the motions, because you have Donald Trump now giving weapons again. It seems like he's going back to the Biden policy and threatening Russia. If you don't change your behavior in 50 days, I'm going to do something. Probably won't do anything. But so against that backdrop, it's very hard to see what actually is going on. But I think Russia is just, and perhaps even Ukraine, are just going through the motions of talking.
Do you think, so that's the other part that I want to go to, because that allows me to pivot into the protests. I think the protests are very strange. I think they are very bizarre. You get Seymour Hersh getting a tip from DC, and in that tip, it says they're going to give rid of Zelensky. After that, you get other articles come out saying Zelensky is a dictator, Zelensky is authoritarian. Then you get Zelensky seemingly trying to solidify his power base by having Yermak move various people around in the political space, prime minister changes. There was somebody else that was changed. And then they find out that Nabu and Sapo we're going to investigate Zelensky and his circle, in which case Zelensky is like, all right, we're going to raid these offices where dozens get raided. I think they detained two, and his justification for it was obviously the Russians had infiltrated these quote unquote corruption organizations that were effectively controlled by the United States. Now, Financial Times have pointed out that regardless of what's being said, Donald Trump still believes that Zelensky is the biggest impediment to peace and that he can better work with Vladimir Putin. At the same time that these organizations get raided, within a few hours, you have massive protests that just rock Ukraine, with them attacking Zelensky directly, attacking Yermak directly. We're not stupid. F Yermak. Sit on a dick, Yermak. Like, this is the stuff that these people are saying. That is a weird thing to say, sit on a dick, Yermak, but maybe it's not translating well. Whatever. The point that I'm making is they don't seem to be natural. They feel like AstroTurf. Are these things related? Where, yeah, Donald Trump is saying, I'm giving you 50 days, but the 50 days is not, it's a bare minimum ultimatum. I mean, for one, the sanctions are expected to hit and hurt the United States every bit as much as it hurts Russia. Russia is not going to flinch. They're going to continue to do what they do. So it's obvious Trump doesn't have any influence on the Russians in this way. And they've made the point before that they wanted to get rid of Zelensky, especially if there's any potential for a deal with Russia. So are we looking, like, how does Russia see these protests? Do they see these protests as being organic? Do they see them as inorganic? And if they are indeed inorganic, what do they think the objective for them are, if not to get rid of Zelensky?
Yeah, we're speculating a bit now because it's still happening. But your questions are absolutely 100% valid, and I think you're kind of angling at, the idea that is the United States trying to get rid of Zelensky, and I would agree with that. If you look at Seymour Hersh's article, you also see how Zelensky's all of a sudden being pictured in some of the Western press. Even the Kiev Independent, the Ukrainian newspaper, wrote a critical piece about Zelensky, always with his very new sort of angry face, looking like one of the bad guys. So I think, there's all these power structures you have within Ukraine and within their masters, if you like. You have the United States, and in the United States you have the Democrats, the whole sort of Biden CIA gang, and then you have the Trump power, and they have their different interests. Then you have the British, who are very important of all of this. The best indications that Zelensky is very much being controlled by the British. The British have their own interests, of course. The Europeans have theirs, but less so. It's more the Americans and the British. And then inside Ukraine, you also have different power structures who are differently aligned with different groups. So even in the Azov, the very powerful and well-known extremist, far-right, whatever you want to call it, nationalist organizations. Some of them are more aligned with the kind of Western NGO types. Some of them are more aligned with the more hardliners in Ukraine. So you have all these different power structures. And I think what you're seeing here is a kind of fight-off for power. These anti-corruption organizations that Zelensky's trying to ban, they're very much linked with the American CIA kind of Democrat Party groups. So, we're speculating at the moment, I think, in that, so why is Zelensky suddenly going after these organizations? He says that they are infiltrated by Russian spies. I doubt that. Well, I don't necessarily doubt that. There probably is one or two Russian spies in that. I'm not sure. But that's clearly aligned to say, oh, well, everything is Russian. So that's not the reason. It's not infiltrated massively by Russian spies. But I think we are seeing ultimately a power play and people coming onto the streets. Most of them will be very genuine, that corruption is a big problem. But Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, with or without these anti-corruption agencies.
Exactly.
Ridiculous. But these protests, I think most of them will be genuine. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's pressure, people pushing them onto the streets and whipping up anger. And I think what you're seeing is a power struggle, and it's difficult to see from who and who's going to win.
Yeah. So just to show some of these articles that just came out of the blue and all at once, as you pointed out, one was pointing out right here, outrage, because all of this stuff happened at the exact same time. And we're to believe that one of the most corrupt countries in the world that everybody knew was super corrupt that all of a sudden it took him getting rid of these two organizations that I'm not even sure how many people knew about to bring thousands of people out into the courtyard. It's just a little, bit rich. Outrage in Ukraine as government attacks anti-corruption watchdog. Here's another one. Yes, I accept. Right here. Thousands gather in Ukraine to protest as Zelensky signs bill weakening anti-corruption agencies. As you pointed out, the one in Kiev Independent, I think the one is called Zelensky has betrayed us, something to that effect. I mean, they just go for the jugular.
It's important to note that when Ukraine dropped the enlistment, the conscription age last year from 27 to 25, there would have been huge anger at that. Were there protests? Yes. Not that I'm aware of. If in Ukraine, just like I'm in Russia at the moment, if you go in front of the Kremlin and start saying I love Zelensky, the police are going to come along. Just like but in Ukraine, you can't go and protest against certain things. But they're allowed to protest this. So clearly the signal has been given, even if it's just by Ukrainian media protesting it, that it's okay for people to take to the streets and protest this issue. Because if they went to the streets and protest another issue, peace, for example, if they wanted peace, they wouldn't be allowed. If they said, we want peace with Russia, Russia isn't that bad, we want peace, we need to give up territory. You're not allowed to do that in Ukraine. But you're allowed to protest this. So clearly, I think there's certain people who want these people on the streets, absolutely.
Do you think these are foreign actors? I mean, because to be very clear, Ukraine didn't have control. I don't begrudge Zelensky for trying to subjugate these organizations to the presidency, or what do they call it, prosecutor directory, or whatever they call it, or prosecutor general's office, which is effectively under Zelensky. Because Ukraine doesn't have control over these organizations. It was a tool that the U.S. was effectively using to kind of guide either policy or at the very least wrap them on the knuckles when they were doing something that they didn't want. And so them going after these organizations seems to be a way for them to try to solidify their power base. It is wild to me that the articles that are coming out are saying Zelensky is making an authoritarian slide. The man has had, what do they call it? Martial law for the last year and a half, nearly 2 years, and has kept kicking the can down the road where he stayed in power. Nobody took issue with him doing that. But on this, he was trying to be an authoritarian. Why? Because he doesn't like a foreign government being able to adversely influence his politics. Okay, that's not really authoritarian. That's just you being a sovereign state, even though Zelensky, Ukraine is not a sovereign state. Do you think this is coming externally, especially considering that Zelensky, for all intents and purposes, seems to be Europe's guy? Like, I don't get the sense that Europe wants Zelensky to go anywhere.
So I think that there is a battle for control of Ukraine. And I'm not talking about the Russians here. The Russian army is moving forward. So really, with the Russians taking more territory, but there's a battle for control of the rest of Ukraine. If you remember, not too long ago, the British signed a 100-year lease for Ukrainian minerals. 100-year lease, right? But then straight afterwards, so a few weeks later, the Americans did their own mineral deal. So you've got this battle between the British and the Americans. Trump, I think, really did want peace in Ukraine as well. But the Europeans went crazy. It was the Europeans who were all lobbying. The French and the British met up straight away. They were shocked that Trump was going to try and make peace, stopping the weapons. So the Europeans were really pushing, the French and the British particularly, really pushing for Trump to continue the war. So you have the differences of opinions between the old kind of CIA, Democrat, incompetent British and French military leaderships, and you have the MAGA Trump. And now I think, and these anti-corruption agencies that Zelensky's going for, they're American controlled. So whether whether the Americans, as per Seymour Hersh's article, saying the Americans want to get rid of him, how do you get rid of him if it's not by force? You try to put political pressure. So maybe I'm just speculating, maybe these anti-corruption agencies were going to put pressure on Zelensky. And let's not forget, if Zelensky will have participated in massive corruption. You don't be president of Ukraine without participating in massive corruption, and many people around him. So, what happens to Zelensky when he gets out of office? Will he go to jail, or we don't know.
Be hanging from a flagpole.
But likely it is part of that power struggle between these different disparate groups, the Americans, parts of the Americans, the British, the French. That's what I suspect all this is part of.
That's if it's one of those things where it's just the Americans and the Europeans are not on board, then a section of the population like Maidan is not necessarily going to be present for them, if indeed it's just the Americans pushing for it. But who knows? I mean,
how do you Zelensky? How do you if the Americans were, because if you want real change in Ukrainian policy, either you want the Ukrainians to make peace with Russia, or you want Ukraine to up their capabilities, if you like. Ukraine, what I'm concerned about, most worried about, I tweeted the other day that the only patriotic thing that Zelensky has done is stand up against NATO's attempts to push Ukraine to mobilize 18 to 25-year-olds. Both the Americans, the White House under Biden, and the British have both said Ukraine needs to mobilize 18-year-olds. Zelensky's always pushed against that, and well done to him for doing that. Last year, the conscription age was dropped from 27-year-olds to 25 years old, 25. But the Russians are continuing to push. If there's no peace, what's going to happen? A German newspaper the other day published an article, a rather absurd article, saying the Ukrainian army is taking to the front line people who are mentally and physically handicapped. How is this happening? How is this happening? The article asked. Well, because they have no men. They have nobody else but mentally. So what's going to happen if the war continues? They're going to have to mobilize 18 to 25-year-olds. So how do you change Ukrainian policy? Well, you need to change the leadership. And I think that's why the Americans are keen, if Seymour Hersh is correct, to change the leadership. And either to push Ukraine for peace, to make peace with Russia, or to get more people mobilized.
I love how they're asking that outright. How is this happening? Like they're outraged by it. How on earth are they just, drafting handicapped people? It's like, dude, you guys have been pushing them to keep a war going for the last several years where they're just obviously running out of manpower. The average age for the Ukrainians were like in their late 40s, which is mind-blowing. People my age running out there on the battlefield, dipping and dodging.
I went to the gym yesterday for the first time in quite a long time. I can hardly walk today, but it's not. We're joking and laughing, but it is not. It is not funny. But
no,
the Russian army is advancing as well. The Russian army is taking Pokrovsk now, which is a very important city.
Yes,
and there could well be a complete collapse in the next months or years. But whatever way, Ukraine needs more soldiers.
Yeah, I agree with you about the not drafting 18-year-olds. I think his argument was we need people to be able to replenish the population. And if we decimate all of them, then we're not going to have anybody. I also think it's telling that the Europeans were perfectly okay with them drafting children for all intents and purposes into the battlefield, because I consider an 18-year-old teenager. So there's that. One last question. What time is it? Okay, one last question. Oh, I'm going to let you go. You answered my questions that I put to you. John, thank you for this. I really, there we go. Yeah, Johnny, thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate it. Fantastic answer. You broke this down very well. Johnny Miller, he is a British journalist based in Moscow, spending much of his time covering the Ukraine war, reporting from Donbass. By the way, where can people find you, though?
I think X is my major one. I have a big following. X, John J. Miller, whatever. Yeah.
Very cool, man.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks, Jamal. Always great to see you.
You have a good one, man. Be safe. Thank you.